Hi, everyone. Wow, that's loud. Hi, welcome. So I am Anna Olsen. I'm so excited to bring back a really old tradition to AU, the Noontime Conversations. How many of you remember the Noontime Conversations? So quite a few. So it was actually an event series that was brought in by the founding director of the Center for Teaching Excellence, CTE, which is a predecessor of CFE, Jack Child. And I think it was in place up until around 2018, 2019, and then paused during the pandemic. And then one of the things that are kind of late to wake up after the pandemic again, but we're bringing it back. So this is the first of 3 Noontime Conversations this fall. Before I introduce our wonderful panel, just a quick note about the flyer on your table. So we do have a lot of events and workshops and resources planned on the topic of AI and teaching and other areas of faculty work. And coming up in 2 weeks from today, in this very room, we have a workshop run by Alison Thomas and Sonia Walty, who is CFE's new faculty associate with a focus on AI and teaching and academic integrity. And it's going to be a hands-on workshop with tips on how to recognize, how to find teachable moments, how to integrate all of the above. So you can sign up already today, actually, with this QR code here. And you can also schedule an appointment with Sonia on anything related to AI and teaching if you want to talk to her and get some advice. And those appointments are in person or via Zoom, your choice. So now, without further ado, I'm very excited to get this started. So we're going to hear some stories from a variety of faculty panelists from around AU on how their journey with AI, or with or without AI, I guess I could say, since generative AI started to emerge in greater significance around spring 2023 or so, and up until today. And so each of the panelists will introduce themselves and then talk for 7 to 8 minutes or so about their own journey. We'll go through all the stories, and then we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. When you do ask questions later, if you could just make sure to wait for the wireless microphone so that we can capture your question for the video we're recording. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and start with Max Friedman from the Department of History.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Anna, for putting this together, and thanks to all of you for coming. Count me as an initial AI skeptic. In 2023, I asked ChatGPT to write a short biography of Max Paul Friedman, and it did instantly. There were 16 statements of fact, 10 were incorrect, including having me go to Stanford rather than Berkeley, which made me particularly upset. And so I shared that with my students, essentially caveat emptor. And my journey since then has been to become very appreciative of its capacities and continue to be concerned about its limitations and downsides. And also aware that it's not the future, it's now. There's still some discussion about what we should call the next generation of students after Gen Z and the Zoomers. Some people say there's going to be Gen Alpha. I think it's going to be Gen AI. They are marinated in it. And so I think it behooves us to find the best way that we can to become guides for them of how to make this a tool that they can use rather than something that uses them. I gather from surveys that we're at something like 92% usage among college students. That's probably now dated. I think it's probably higher. 95% of companies surveyed report they're using some form of AI tool, but of course now there's so many AI tools. You know, if you Google, you're using AI, et cetera. And the slogan in Silicon Valley has become, AI is not coming for your job. Someone who knows how to use AI is coming for your job. And yet, in the most recent survey I looked at, 55% of college grads said, no, I didn't get training with this. I don't know how to use it. I wish I had. And so it's here. Some of my colleagues want to fight it. I think that trying to get students not to use AI is probably going to be about as successful as abstinence-only sex education. So I'm not from that school, although I do acknowledge the many good reasons why I wish that there were more AI-free spaces, and those range from the ones that are familiar to us, the environmental, the expense, the inequities built into the system, the inequities of where the data centers are placed, and the impact that it has on young people's, stunting young people's intellectual development in ways that may cause permanent damage. So with that all on that side of the ledger, I do hope that universities will be involved and very engaged in the further development of how AI works in society. We were not very present in the evolution of social media, and so we got what we got, which is that the algorithms broke society and we're awash in misinformation and hate and all the political consequences. To make this a little bit more tangible in terms of education, well, in the history department, when I became chair this year and in advance of this semester, I asked every faculty member to include an AI statement in their syllabus. I didn't tell them what it had to be, but I offered a model which draws loosely on the American Historical Association's recommendations from its committee that worked on this for the last year. And it goes something like this. I'll do an abbreviated version for a syllabus statement. If, like most students, you use AI tools, please remember that doing your own reading, analysis, note-taking, and writing is essential for developing your own creativity, critical thinking, and scholarly skills. Gen AI tools can produce text that looks like a history paper, but it often contains errors, relies on weak or conventional argumentation, and skims open web sources rather than engage in deep research into primary sources and scholarship. AI can be useful to augment, rather than replace, the work of knowledgeable people. These tools can help you talk through ideas for papers, edit your own writing for clarity, conciseness, and professional presentation, summarize key points of an article or a book before, not instead of, reading it, and generate an initial bibliography that must be verified and expanded using search methods your faculty teach you. The tools can help format footnotes and proofread text that you write. They should never be used to produce an assignment that you submit as your own work. And then there are 7 rules, and the 7 rules have to do with disclosure, still being responsible for anything that may appear under your name. So to make clear to the students that Gen AI often introduces errors. If you submit those errors in a paper with your name on it, you're responsible for those errors. They're yours now. So you have to check to submit any prompts or responses that you have used with a Gen AI tool so that we can learn what works as well as what didn't. And finally, two other points. Use Gen AI only in ways that you find ethical and constructive. And finally, you may opt out if you have objections to the use of Gen AI, because a fair number of my students do, I've noticed. There's always 2, 3, 4 in a class who say, I don't want to use that, either because they're concerned about that community in Chile that can't draw on its own water anymore, or because they're concerned about what it's doing to their brains. So disclosure being key. One tangible example of this, maybe I'll give you 2 examples, and then I'll stop. In an introductory US core course called Social Forces That Shaped America, about social movements, I asked the students to read a journal article which is about late 19th century labor movement formation. Then I asked them to dig into a variety of historical newspapers from that era, find some reporting about strikes or labor actions, and then to write about what they had learned in light of the scholarly framework offered in the journal article. And all of those items were behind a paywall, but that doesn't really make any difference anymore because they can take it out of the paywall and upload it to the Gen AI program. But that was cumbersome enough that almost all of the students did what I asked, that is to apply their brains to these materials and then produce a short, it was supposed to be short, a short assessment that didn't sound like Gen AI and wasn't produced by Gen AI, although some, especially of my English language learner students, were happy that they had permission to go through and refine their writing so that the grading wouldn't be so much about does prose come out polished when I do it, or can I use the tool that everybody in the work world uses now to clean up their work. Possibly more interesting example is in a 400, 600 level course on the history of US foreign policy. I give them an assignment where they should think themselves back to 1941, to the fall, when there's a crisis in East Asia and the United States is trying to change the Japanese behavior without winding up in a war with Japan. And can they produce advice that the Secretary of State could take into a cabinet meeting on what US policy should be? To do that, they're given about 6 or 7 documents, which include arguments from that era, mostly primary sources. And on that basis, they should do the following. Feed the prompt into their favorite Gen AI tool, see what kind of a policy memo it produces, and then critique the output on the basis of their own reading of the sources. And there's a second assignment that's connected to the same materials, which is then when we reconvene in class, we have a role play of a cabinet meeting for FDR to try to figure out what to do about East Asia policy, in which they have to articulate an argument from one or another points of view of the historical figures. And I think that was the reason that this assignment worked well, because they understood they had to prepare for a public performance where they would be under the eyes of their peers. So they read the stuff, and having read the stuff, they were in a good position to assess what came from the Gen AI programs that they used. And I asked them to give a grade, as well as I have 7 guiding questions of how to critique the policy memo, both per se and also as a Gen AI product. And the results were very gratifying to me. They learned 2 things. They learned a lot about the East Asia crisis of 1941 and the difficulty of formulating US policy in such situations. And they also learned the impressive capabilities and real limitations of a variety of Gen AI tools, because they could choose their own. By the way, the best one was DeepSeek. The Chinese version did a much better memo than the others, for what it's worth. And the grades that they assigned to the Gen AI products ranged, most of them, between B- and D, because they found the hallucinated sources. They looked up the citations and found that isn't in that book, and the argumentation had fatal flaws that they figured out through their own reasoning. So that was pretty successful. Are there ways to try to fake all of that production by using, by asking, a second Gen AI to do the critique? Yes, but it isn't as good what comes out. And I got a couple of those, and I graded them on the merits, and the merits were relatively low. So those as examples of how I've approached this in the context of history courses.
Thank you so much, Max. We're now going to move on to Angela Virtu from the Kogod School of Business Department of Information Technology and Analytics. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. As Anna just lovely introduced myself, I'm Angela Virtu, and I'm in Kogod. My journey probably looks a lot different than most of the people in this room or even on this panel. So I actually come from a pretty tech-heavy background where I actually worked with AI startups for about 10 years before I joined the faculty full-time. So I have the perspective of being able to build these AI systems, use them within a business context, and either have our paying customers leverage this technology in a very specific use case, or actually build tools internally for this business where our own staff members would be able to leverage this technology for their own workflows. So when I came to Kogod, I really just started to come as a teacher. I liked tech, I liked students, I liked teaching. That's what I really like to do. And about 2 years ago, AI hit, and over this past 2 years, my role has shifted a little bit, where now, on top of all my teaching and integrating AI into the classroom, I've been working really hard in teaching all of our own faculty and staff what AI is, how it works, and how they can kind of start incorporating it into their classroom. And so what I'll share with you all today is a few ways of how I've embedded AI into my own curriculum, into my own teaching pedagogy, but I'll also share a few of the things that I'm kind of having conversations on the side with all of our own faculty and staff, because I think as we reflect on the past 18 months, all of our efforts within Kogod has been very siloed, right? It's been, here's this tool, here's this technology, go figure it out, I'll help you, let's use it in our own classes. And what we're recognizing is that the way that we assess and evaluate and integrate AI into our classroom has to be far more multifaceted, and it needs to be stacked and scaffolded like we think normal learning outcomes. So I'll share a little bit about how we're starting to redefine all of that AI skill progression across the curriculum, involving, horizontal tiers of our 100, 200, 300, and so on classes. So one of the biggest things that I think we all need to recognize is that, as we've talked about, AI is here, but more importantly, it's up to us as the educators to either empower our students to use this technology in a thoughtful way. And if we don't do it, they're just going to be used by this technology, right? They all have TikTok, they all have social media, they're all being used by these big tech companies to gather information and data and, however else you want to talk about it. And the same thing is applied to AI. So they're either going to be users of it or they're going to be used by it. And I think there's a really big distinction of what we can be doing to help those students be good users of it. So in my own classrooms, I do many of the same tools that we already talked about. I have disclosure forums, we have conversations, but the one big thing that I've been incorporating is bringing the discussion back into the classroom. So one of the assignments that I've tweaked a little bit is in my introduction information to technology and business class, we used to do this thing called Tech in the News, where all of our students would go for a week, find a relevant news article from a particular time period, and they used to just post it on the Canvas discussion board, right? Well, that doesn't really work right now as well. So what we've done is we brought this assignment into the classroom. So over the course of a week, they'll still go out, they'll find a good tech news article, they'll do a little summary and have a little bit of commentary that they can post in that discussion board. But now there's a level of accountability because when they come to class that following week, they're all going to get into small groups. They're going to talk to one another and they're going to pitch their tech news to one another. They're going to say, hey, I found on the New York Times this article about NVIDIA, not selling their chips to China anymore, or whatever that is. They'll give a little summary and they'll peer share with one another, have conversations, laptops closed, notes away, and just have a conversation with one another. And then after they do their little conversations, I'll call on a few people to share what someone else shared from the class to the larger group, right? So now we can still leverage the same concept of what we were trying to achieve in that Canvas discussion board, but now bring it into the classroom where not only are they now drawing connections of our class material into topical news articles, but also working on their interpersonal skills, right? And screens down, being able to talk to one another, which in this age of AI is going to become much more important for all of our students to have, as opposed to just being able to accomplish a task, right? AI is really good at that and is only going to get better in the next little bit of time. Another example I have is from my more advanced 300 level programming class. Before, I used to just say, hey, we're data analysts. Here's this large data set. There's 6 million data points. Go futz around with it and tell a really compelling story about what your recommendation would be for this particular business problem. But now with AI, you can upload that data set and it'll spit it out. And here you go. Here's your recommendation. So now I task my students to not only do that, but now they have to do a full stack web app that's live, where they can create an entire shiny dashboard in the same amount of time as the old example or the old way. But now they have to figure out what's the data story that wants to be told from the AI to create this live interactive dashboard. Now my students, they aren't pure programmers. They know how to use a little bit of coding. They know how to do data analytics. But before, without this technology, they never would have been able to accomplish that level of scope of work without using AI in that tangible way. To close here, because I know I'm a little short on time, I just want to leave with what we're working on now in Kogod, which is integrating a more thoughtful, scaffolded approach. So every single one of our classes aren't teaching students this is what's wrong with it in the exact same tone or the exact same lesson with prompt engineering or whatever that individual skill set might be. So at the 100 level, it's all what's wrong with AI, and we go on from there.
Thank you so much, Angela. And next up, we have Benjamin Stokes from the School of Communication.
Can you hear me now? Testing? Yes? Okay, great. A little closer. All right, is that better? Great. I'm so glad that we're having this conversation around AI, and I deliberately want to frame this as a conversation which is actually a little bit rare, just to acknowledge that mostly we have faculty teaching classes very autonomously, which is a lot of fun as a faculty member. I'm not, compared to like K-12 teaching, not tracking learning standards that are enforced on me across it. There's a lot of autonomy. The AI moment is really interesting for how it's actually forcing conversation across and what should we do. And I do think we need to. One interesting data point on this is we're hearing a lot of frustrations from our students right now that they are getting such different answers from faculty about what is acceptable with AI, and they don't believe most of the faculty. They don't believe that they can be caught, or they don't believe that they should use it at all. When they're a really interesting thing. So I'm drawing a lot of my experience on a class both our capstone class, which is one of our last undergraduate classes for our bachelor's degree in communication studies. I was teaching that in the spring, and also a class Com 365, Digital Media and Culture, which is kind of an advanced theory and involves a lot of reflecting on technology and some of the forces that where it comes from. But one interesting thing is this disbelief is, to me, a really interesting part of it. It ties a little into our fake news moment and the challenge of getting past what truth around AI with ideologies around AI. I think all of us need to build up our skills to be able to talk about ideology and not what is true, because truth is not enough. Truth has to be paired with how people are approaching it. Just as an example of this, to echo what Max was saying, I think that our number is actually higher. I'd say about 10+% of our students treat AI similar to like organic or genetically modified food. They say it's a personal choice and I refuse to use it. I refuse. It is unethical. It's terrible. And I'm like, that's actually an interesting problem. How are they going to engage if they are actually ideologically opposed? And there's another equal percentage who are ideologically pro. They believe this is critical for them getting there. And both groups I find to be equally unwilling to listen to the other side. So we're talking about polarization, right? We have AI polarization going on among our students. And I think if we just approach this as a curricular matter and we're going to give them skills, that we have failed to engage at the level of the ideology that's emerging around AI. And of course, that these are hard conversations to have. I think that I do want to particularly push for us to think about how we treat AI. I hear a lot of people say we need critical thinking around AI, but then interestingly pivot to lecture at our students about critical thinking as if the way we teach critical thinking is by telling them you should do critical thinking. And I think that this is a great moment to think about, well, if critical thinking is a skill, how do we build some of those skills? I think some of the examples that my colleagues have mentioned are really great around this kind of building reflective practice. One example that came up early in a class, I was really disappointed with the message board posts I was seeing, and that there was a group of people that were posting things that were almost certainly from AI. But this is a classic moment I think many of you have also struggled with. Do you confront them? Do I have proof? What does that moment look like? And so this is in the interest of sharing, which is I think how this session was structured. One experience that came out of there that I thought was pretty interesting. I asked them, they could all see each other's posts, to read through and see if they thought they could identify ones that had been written with AI. I said, now don't say names. We're not going to out and point at people, but let's see if you can, and then let's talk about that a little bit. And since we're absolutely convinced, I could tell there's about 3 or 4. I know exactly which ones are using AI. I said, well, how does that make you feel? If you were in a workplace, how would you respond to that? And the students were actually pretty harsh about how they would reject the AI. And this was very different from me saying, you shouldn't use AI. This was them hearing from each other that they could tell what things sounded like AI. The next week came back, same discussion post. I didn't change what I was requiring. I didn't lecture them. Almost none of them sounded like AI. The writing practice had really changed. And now it's not to say they weren't using AI. I'm in this interesting moment. It's a very like postmodern moment for those of you that are willing to tolerate postmodernism. I don't know if they're using AI, and I don't know that that's always the right question. But I think the question of whether someone sounds like AI is actually an important question. And in some ways, we talk about preparing them for the future, telling them how to write AI prompts, but not thinking about audience, to me is missing the point. This is partly about audience. It's partly about how humans and computers work together, which of course is also the age that we're in, even regarding spell check, right? The need for spelling precision has changed with spell check. One of the things I'm trying to do is also to fight against this AI as if it's one thing. AI, of course, any of us that have looked at it know that AI is, there are many different kinds of AI. They mean different things in different contexts. Search has had machine learning under it for many years. Computer games have had AI and non-player characters in them for decades. ChatGPT and Gen AI, some things of it are very new, but there are some ways in which we need to be able to differentiate the types. So using more specific language is a really important piece of this as well, beyond just like product names. One of the ways that this is shifting assignments to share another part of this journey, one of the bets that we've been making in my department in communication studies, we've been arguing that process and the metacognition around process is much more important. And product, in some ways, is a little less important. And that's a weird thing to say, right? We want to be outcomes focused, and what does it mean to be focused on process? Well, as an example, a standard thing that would happen at the end of a course is students would write a paper and turn it in. And one thing that's really changing right now is we're saying a greater percentage of your grade should be around turning an appendix to that paper that shows the process you went on to get to that paper and a number of intermediate stages along the way. So if you have no pictures of whiteboards where you brainstormed your outline, then I can't tell your process and you can't explain your process to me. And at first they were like, well, how does this work? And why should we be doing this? And part of what we talked about with them is actual organizations, you often have to take your boss on a learning journey. I did all this research, but you can't just tell them, here's the result. Now you should change the corporate strategy to X. Not gonna happen. That's not how it happens, right? You have to bring your boss, you have to manage up, take them on your journey, tell them what you learned along the way. It's not just about the final memo that says, now we should invest in this company, and now we should sell off this division. Now we should write this book or not publish this author. It's always about bringing other people on that journey, and process is a part of it. So we're really shifting big papers. Big papers we used to be the standard. That was the big thing you did for your final project. You wrote a big research paper, right? Now what we're saying is that research paper needs to be we're going to shrink the size of that a little bit because it's easier to generate. It'd be tempting to say, well, then generate more. No, generate less, but show us more process. And we're going to give you more of the grade around can you walk us through process, and priority given to artifacts that feel authentic. So this question of how do you feel authentic? How do you establish your role? Again, things like photographs of whiteboards where you met with other students, you received reflection, you tracked changes, showing tracked changes as an intentional part in your own work, telling students they need to track changes on their work and turn in the track changes as part of their appendix, is a way that we shift the visibility of the human role in that process. So my two pitches of things to try, have students reflect on voice and authenticity in a peer setting, and then think about larger writing projects increasingly relying on process as a thing to be articulated, performed, talked through, as a way of kind of balancing where we sit with AI. And last, this is as you're doing all of this, keep coming back to our students are not monoliths. A bunch of them are not using AI. I get really upset when I hear all these kids these days, they all get AI. No, there's some of them that have not used it at all and are refusing to use it and are really opposed to even thinking through engagement. And meanwhile, there are others who are using it a lot, but very, very poorly. And this is actually what I've seen to be the norm in our classes, is that we have incredibly varied undergraduate population with how they're engaging with AI. And think of that almost as a kind of like diversity, cognitive diversity around AI use and practice that we need to address in our classes.
Thank you so much, Ben. Yeah, feel free. Did I hear a clap or was that a no? We can wait. Yeah. Ying Chen Peng from the Department of Art.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Ying Chen Peng here. So I think my AI journey is really deeply engaged with our programs on crafting of an AI policy. 2 years ago, our program colleagues already sensed the opportunity and danger of AI. So we drafted our own AI use policies But I wanted to share that at the second part of my sharing, because to me, I find embedding AI tools in teaching more effective for lower level courses. So I wanted to use my AU core course as an example to show to everyone how I try to balance between proactive learning and mindful use of AI tools. So the course I teach is called Buddhist Arts of Asia. So it has a lot of visual component to it. And I find it quite interesting that nowadays our students use AI tools mostly for textual resources. So I wanted to try how we can use AI tools to help them engage with images more. So this is what I do. I borrowed these assignment ideas from my colleague Juliet over there. So we have a semester-long project. The first part is to ask them to make a trip to the mall and visit the assigned museum, to choose an artwork, take a selfie, and then make an annotated drawing. And then they come back for the second part. That would be the first usage of AI tool. I asked them to use the prompt that I provide, and the prompt goes, I am studying the artwork with the accession number of that artwork in this museum. I am interested in, and then they have to fill out 4 blanks. And then now, find me 5 to 10 scholarly works. And they have to use the same prompt in ChatGPT, in Gemini, and DeepSeek to find 3 sets of the scholarly works. And after that, they have to compare, these 3 sets, and then go back to the library catalog and find the call number of those books, or to download those articles, because that's a very good way to train them to verify the information they receive from AI tools. A lot of times, they find fake entries. For example, a real scholar, but that person never wrote that article, or a fake book. So this is the first step of making them aware of the usefulness of the AI tool and the possible hallucination. They should always be mindful to verify that. And then after that stage, they start to come to talk to me. So this, the observation of the process of thinking, I really give heavy weight on this discussion part, because they should digest what the AI tools provided and come to meet with me in person. So we come up with a presentation and research plan. And then the next step, they will create a 10 minutes presentation, recorded presentation, based on the information and the scholarly works that they learned from AI, but they have to digest and reproduce digitally. And they will also be watching each other's presentations and make connections with their own presentations. And I started doing this practice last year. And every time students surprised me with the kind of richness of their research. So I just feel that for this big assignment, there's a mixture of in-person component that they have to come in, discuss, discussing the information they learned, but also they also get to practice and observe different AI tools, the pros and cons. And the other AI tools, the way of AI tools I use is for the final exam, I use AI to generate images with my sets of prompts. So I usually would use 4 or 5 prompts, say a Buddha, the Gandhara style, and say 1st century BCE. And those AI tools would generate images. And my students have to come in for oral exam. They have to analyze those AI-generated images and give me the keywords that they think I used. And then next, they're going to tell me the possible rationale. Why would the AI tool give me this picture according to these prompts? what visual features match this definition of the particular style or time periods, and what looks wrong. So that's also a very good way of training them to look at what AI provides with a critical eye. So I find it quite interesting as well, because a lot of them never realized that AI tools can make so many mistakes, especially in terms of image generating. Sometimes they will realize that, well, actually for this prompt, this site should be in a desert. But how come now I'm given a image of a temple with a lot of wooden structures? There was like no forest or no woods. Or how come the image I received now has 7 fingers? Or the positioning or the proportion of the body looks very off. So I just think that as art historians, it's really exciting to see how now our students actively engage with the digital images. And as for the writing part, English is not my mother tongue. So I started using AI tools to help my own writing early on and learned a lot from it. But when I started teaching the thesis writing course, it just surprised me that none of my students actually submitted their draft with any trace of using AI tools to do some self-editing. So I feel that there seems to be a generational gap. Sometimes I feel that the grad students are very cautious. They actually avoid using AI tools, thinking that it's unethical. But for undergrads, especially freshmen and sophomore, it's already part of their life. So it's also quite interesting that even within this particular demography of our students, I can see these different attitudes. But at any rate, because writing is such an important component, so our program drafted that AI use policy, and I find it very useful. I wanted to very quickly, provide the categories that we made with you all. And Julia, if we agree, we can definitely share this policy with everyone interested. Okay. So for us, when we thought about how AI can help our students write, we divided the usage into 3 tiers. So for applicable use, our students can use AI to find definitions or explanations of very basic concepts, and for revision of the writing mechanics of a text. But then for cautionary use, if students use AI for these purposes, then they should consult their academic advisors, professors, and with caution. This tier includes background information on a topic, a list of sources on a topic, brainstorming possible paper topics, title of a paper or presentation, feedback on student written work, revision of text to shorten word count, and a capstone or conference abstract. So these are something, you can use, but with consultation with the professors. And as for the prohibited use, they include generating content, of course, summaries of readings and lectures. But after we drafted that, darn it, we realized that JSTOR now has that function of summarizing the article for you directly. So we may need to revisit this category. And then study guides for an exam, outline for a paper or presentation, a draft of a paper or discussion post, and script for a presentation. So we just wanted to make our standards very transparent and clear. So every semester, I use this guideline as an appendix to my syllabus, so students are aware that while they're welcome, encouraged actually to use AI tools, but there are standards and there are do's and don'ts that they should abide by. So this is what we practice here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yin-Cheng. We're going to move to the very end of the table with Sarah Gilchrist from the library.
Thank you. All right, I'm really happy to hear about all of these different examples that people have about how they're using AI, using a critical lens. My personal journey with artificial intelligence started as I'm a candidate in a doctoral program that's focused on information and interaction design, and so specifically user experience. And I got into that program because as a teacher, I'm really interested in how we develop habits of inquiry and the ways that technology can provide access to information and the ways that it can provide barriers to information. And I'm working closely as a librarian with students, and so I may see them during their research process, and I see the habits that students have now, like using only JSTOR or only using Google Scholar, and I think about the ways that AI is creating new habits that are aligned with research for our students. And we are also part of a group in the library that's been doing critical analysis of the embedded AI tools, including JSTOR, the one that's in Primo, which is our catalog search tool. A lot of students just use Primo. They just use our catalog search, which does not search everything that we have. But because of Google and because of the way that our internet environment is set up, students' habits are to go to one place to look for information. And so I think artificial intelligence, we talk a lot about AI as if it is one thing. And what we see a lot is the use of large language models. And there are a lot of assumptions that we bring to the table. One of those assumptions is that it is intelligent or that it has accuracy. And as you can tell, it's somewhere between 20 and 40% accurate, depending on what you're asking it for. We've also done some examples where we ask students to ask questions about themselves, and we've gotten results that aren't accurate there. But what we really need to be thinking about is our level of understanding and knowledge. I had a graduate student with professional experience come into my office, and I always ask when students come in, where have you looked so far? And this is the first time that one of them said, well, I went to ChatGPT to do my literature review. And as you know, it's hallucinating and it's kind of piecing together citations, which means that this graduate student is not taking part in a scholarly conversation. They're taking part in a fake scholarly conversation. And I think that when we're thinking about these tools in terms of students, we're talking about them in terms of novice users or users that maybe don't have a canon or a deep expertise and understanding of the things that they're searching for, like the art history example. I've seen this also with algorithmic searches. If you look on Google and you look in the images search, even searching for yourself, let alone a work of art, then you get a lot of false positives. But if you don't know that what you're looking at is a false positive, then you don't know that you should be differentiating between those things. I have a lot to say about this. I think that we are also in a sort of a hype cycle right now where the marketing perspective for artificial intelligence is driven by techno-determinism. And as somebody who's a woman in a STEM field, I see this a lot. It's that rhetoric that says that you have to do this because you're not going to have a job if you don't do it, or you have to do this because this is the way that it is. And that doesn't allow room for critical inquiry or review of specific tools. I have had a lot of problems with the JSTOR summary tool. I've had a lot of problems with our Primo summary tool because our students aren't using it as a step to do their own analysis. They're using it as the analysis, which means that our educational foundations are being undermined. by this tool because our students' habits are to go to one place and find one thing and find the answer and not to question that. So I applaud everybody's efforts to get people to dig into this a little bit deeper. I think that, so I've been looking at social informatics and feminist human-computer interaction as some theoretical underpinnings for how to do an analysis of AI tools. They're changing so much that it's like trying to catch a speeding train. But I think that all of us can do that on our own. We've talked a little bit about the accuracy of information and kind of what it can do and what it can't do. In my first year, since I mostly work with graduate students, I get to work with first-year students in the writing classes, and I've given them a challenge to help determine which story that I tell them is a conspiracy theory and which thing is real. And I have 3 stories. This is where the history department comes in. One of them is about a cabal of models that have been brainwashed to assassinate world leaders. Another one is about the heir to the Russian throne who is secretly living in another part of the world. And the third one is about a Jewish FBI agent who is tracking down Nazi spies during World War II. And they have to bring their own thoughts into that conversation and what they think they know and what they don't know. But when I put those questions or those stories into ChatGPT to see what it could tell me, it quickly understood that the first one was Zoolander. It got me information about Anastasia when I put that information in there. But in the information environment that we talk about in the library, those are surface level pieces of information. That's the information that we have available to us on the internet. The deep part of the information is the stuff that we find in archives, that we find in primary source materials, and that stuff isn't going to be on the internet. And so our own understanding about what is and isn't available through artificial intelligence is false because we assume that everything's been digitized. The third one is my spouse's doctoral research. And he found in the archives information about Edwin Sackett that, he was finding Nazi spies. But so I want those students to see that every tool isn't useful in every situation, and that the information that we bring into our questioning shapes the results that we get back. There's all kinds of information and research. I highly recommend Safiya Noble's book, Algorithms of Oppression. She talks about how the prompts that we put in determine the shape of the results that we get back, and that could be very detrimental not only to our own learning, but to how we think about a problem in general. So this idea of critical information evaluation is really important. I will plug the Association for College and Research Librarians because we already have some frameworks for how to do critical information literacy. And one of them is the framework for information literacy, but there's also a specific framework that just came out by Leo Lowe that's about how to use ACRL's framework for artificial intelligence. So if you're not sure, ask the librarians. We're definitely talking about this stuff. And then also keep poking around with these tools. Like test them out, see what works, what doesn't work. When it's giving you false positives, we can test this with our deep understanding of specific areas and then pass that information along to our students and hopefully help shore up this foundation.
Thank you, Sarah. And now to our final panelist, Alison Thomas, our Assistant Dean for Academic Integrity and also a faculty member in the Department of Literature.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. I don't want to take too much time. I feel like is that better? Okay. I feel like my voice is around on this quite a lot. A lot of people are maybe sick of hearing from me about it. And in general, I'm kind of used to being on campus and people being like, ugh, I was hoping not to run into you because I work in academic integrity, and sometimes that means somebody's calling about a concern. So to start with where what my perspective is on AI is to, it's like I think about AI all the time now. Starting in March 2023, I started thinking about AI when I was eating, when I was like dreams and then nightmares. I talked to faculty about it. I talked to people in my family, send me like 15 emails a day. Anything in the news that's coming up about AI and academic integrity. And you've seen, if you're following anything, any mainstream media news, like almost every publication has got at least a thing a week about how AI is going to sort of collapse how we teach, how we learn, how we think. Universities, I would say it's like one of the top 5 issues, existentially, sort of existential oriented sort of conversation about AI and higher education. So that's really been occupying a lot of my thinking. But certainly my perspective is informed by some things that haven't changed over the course of my life, which is I think of myself as a student and as a curious person who became a teacher. And that's really how I see myself. That's how I sort of operate in the university and in the world. I teach in the writing, I've taught in the writing program for like almost 20 years. And information literacy has come into my work through that channel. And so I've learned a lot from my librarian friends and colleagues about information literacy learning. And so that really informs a lot of how I think about and approach all these questions about generative AI. I feel like the questions about AI came early to me because faculty immediately on the ground in a classroom were like, I do not think this paper was written by my student. And this is a problem that needs to get addressed immediately, which anybody who's been at a university for 5 minutes knows that anything to change here takes a really, really long time. Any large policy, any all-encompassing framework or set of guidelines, these things take conversations and collaboration, and this is a really important part of the work we do. But in my office, these problems need relatively quick conclusions, right? If you don't think a student wrote a paper, then you have potentially an academic integrity code violation on your hands. Our office issues outcomes based on what we find to be code violations. And those have to happen pretty quickly. Our cases generally get resolved within a couple weeks. So because of that sort of like immediate need for response, that's part of what made this feel very frenzied to me right from the beginning. Like, I need to help people solve these problems. Everyone's looking at this as a problem. I need to help people solve these problems. And then students also interact with my office, and I hear from students and how some of their problems have evolved. Some of you have described that kind of sense that across the university, the rules are different. Students navigate this across classes all the time. Our classrooms have different classroom policies. But this is a pretty big one to navigate for students. I also think some of the habits that have changed that I've seen include a kind of increase in the level of academic anxiety students feel about justifying, defending, or responding to accusations about their work. I think a lot of students report feeling prepared to be accused of submitting work that's not their own, to the point where some of them have changed their process. So I asked a student a couple of months ago, I was like, that seems okay. Like, what have you done to change your process? And she was like, well, I do this, and then I take some screenshots, and then I save this draft, and then I save this version, and then I do that. And I was sort of like, in my mind, I was like, that could be interesting in a metacognitive way, right? Like reflecting on process and being aware of what you're doing sounds really interesting. And I said, have you learned something about your process, or has that sort of changed? Has it changed something for you? Do you feel like you've learned from that? She was like, I've learned I need to take a lot more time because I'm a lot more stressed. I was sort of like, oh, it was sort of heartbreaking to think that our students might be preparing to feel accused. And I think it does speak to some of the assumptions that I've seen amongst colleagues that all use of AI is cheating. And I actually don't really use the word cheating a lot. I guess I use it if I'm thinking about like you're taking a test and I'm looking over here, or I've written something on my hand. Because to me, cheating is like an old school way of talking about things that have changed quite a lot. And I guess this will seem like a contradiction when I say one of the things I've learned in thinking so much about AI and academic integrity is that the issues that we find with AI misuse, I don't think are that different than the academic integrity issues I was thinking about before. And I don't think the solutions or the approaches or the ways we can navigate this are that different than what was coming up in really good conversations about this before. And so by that I mean, since 2015, I've been working with academic integrity cases. I've done a lot of research on academic integrity and its connection to information literacy and habits of mind and what academic citizenship really means. And I find from that research that by and large, our approach as in sort of higher education, our approach to academic integrity is telling, not teaching. As in, here's the policy. I assume that when you read the words, you know what it means and you know how to follow it. And even in 2015, when I wasn't thinking about generative AI, there were students who didn't really have the skills or the experience to be able to read the policy and follow it. This is how academic integrity code is different from other policies. It's not like you can't park here or don't keep a space heater in your office. There's confusion and there's a kind of skills development that's required to uphold some of these values. And the example I'll give is paraphrasing. That's been an issue that I think has come up in academic integrity work constantly. There's a study, 2000-2001, where a bunch of faculty in different disciplines were given an article and asked to paraphrase a certain portion of it, and then circulate their responses and make a judgment about what was successfully paraphrased and what wasn't. And you might expect there was no agreement over what a good paraphrase was. And some folks even qualified or described their peers' paraphrase as explicit plagiarism, right? And so if there's that kind of disagreement across disciplines and across faculty members, it reminds us that paraphrasing is difficult, that our students need attention to paraphrasing, but really to the sort of skills and concepts required to be a responsible academic citizen. So like that's kind of what I've been talking about and thinking about since 2015. And in March 2023, I was like, you want to talk about academic integrity? My ship has come in. Like this is really a moment for me. And I've said that over and over again, that like suddenly people wanted to talk about academic integrity because AI had sort of like pushed this to the front. What does it mean to be a responsible consumer of information? What does it mean to be a responsible user of information? What is help? This is another issue that's come to the fore with AI tools because a lot of students report using AI tools as help. And when I hear that, I think a few things. One, are we defining help the same way? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. We also see in a lot of the reporting about who's using AI tools and for what, that these tools are being used for tutoring, these tools are being used for help, that students prefer using technological tools and generative AI for questions about a course, for questions about the material they're learning, over a tutoring center, over a professor, that there's this attraction towards an ease with these digital tools. While at the same time, students are saying, but yes, I want more human interaction. So this is a really confusing kind of moment. So I think all that's to say, I really appreciate I wanted to highlight some of the wonderful things that I heard today. I think our faculty have really been struggling with what this all means because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to rethink what you do. It feels like, oh, I'm having COVID flashbacks of like teaching myself how to teach online. And we're right here again. How do I think about teaching now? How do I assign work now? How do I encourage metacognition now in this different, the stakes are different, the situation is different. How do I do that? I think the examples that you gave about your department, art history department, is great. I was privileged to be invited into that conversation for a minute, and it was really cool to see like people who are teaching the same thing or people who study the same thing have meaningful conversations about like, what does this look like here? What does responsible work look like here? And Max, you mentioned professional organizations or scholarly organizations, even journals, especially if you're working with graduate students at all, I think are really great ways to think about sort of how do we make guidelines, how do we put guardrails, how do we establish parameters. Those are wonderful examples. So yeah, in my office, we've seen cases of misuse of AI a lot. It's almost the entirety of our caseload in the past year. Just to give you like a few quick numbers, in 23, 24, about 35-ish% of our cases were what I would label as AI related, and I can say more about what that means. And in 24, 25, mid 50% of our cases were AI related. And if I narrowed that down to spring, 65% of our cases are AI related. And when I say AI related, according to our code, which doesn't explicitly say anything about generative AI, it does say things about some of the problems generative AI can create if someone is not a responsible user. So like fabrication of data, hallucination, sources that don't exist is the biggest sort of issue that we've seen. Misrepresentation, which is part of our definition of plagiarism, which is saying something comes from a source, but it's actually not from that source. And then the sort of dishonesty in papers or exams kind of catch-all, which is you submitted work that's not your own and there's no acknowledgement. That's kind of where we've kind of seen issues with AI come up. It is very difficult to find evidence that someone has submitted work generated by AI as their own. We don't use detection tools. I can talk about that if anybody's interested. We have pretty thoughtful reasons behind that. And so I think what this means moving forward is like these conversations are more and more important. I think examples of the really interesting ways that folks are using AI literacy in their classrooms and embedding thoughtful ways of incorporating these tools or being critical about the tools that are already incorporated is really, really important. So I'll stop there, and if you have questions specific to something in your class, you can feel free to get in touch with me at athomas@American. But I'm looking forward to hearing more from these folks. Thanks.
Thank you, Allison. Is there a question from Sarah?
I just wanted, I forgot to mention this. We're talking about putting data sets into artificial intelligence, large language models, and don't do that. Unless, like, even if you generated that data yourself, we have a lot of copyright protections in terms of data sets and other materials. If you didn't write it or own it, don't put it into AI. But even if you did, you have to worry about privacy and protections in that regard.
Thank you, Sarah. So we do have about 15 minutes or so for questions. If you have a question, raise your hand, and then please wait for the microphone before you ask your question. And if you could also introduce yourself. Thank you. Yes, Andrew? Yeah.
Hello, Andrew Taylor. I'm in the Arts Management program over there. I really appreciate this, and I guess I'm here. I'm wondering if there's a chance to flip the script. That really what we're talking about is generative human intelligence, and it's changing relationship and resources and responsibilities, and that sometimes we're getting focused on how do we deal with this external thing, when actually what I'm hearing you all say is you're trying to prepare your students to apply their intelligence in this changing landscape. And I guess I'm concerned that a lot of the new curriculum talk we're talking about here is just students need to use AI. They need to know how to use it as if it's a skill. When actually what's at the core of the university is knowing how to be a responsible, thoughtful human. But I don't know whether that flipping the script helps in this case, or just I'm just noticing this. The real power is the AI is going to change, and it's actually everything at once. But the human is, has a body, has a responsibility, has relationships, and that's all being transformed. So So I'm just curious if there's an opportunity to sort of say, well, actually we're talking about what we've always talked about, which is helping humans be more active and responsible in their world.
There is a question in there somewhere. Who would like to answer it?
I'll say something. Yes, and in my opening day rap to the students about Gen AI, I point out that it's an exciting technology. It will surely make tremendous advances in a lot of realms that we'll all feel. There may be new medicines that come as a result of the speed of analysis that's made possible and so forth. And in the short term, it has immediately made possible the democratization of the production of smoothly written, grammatically correct, polished crap. And if you would like to be a person who at the touch of a button can produce smoothly written, grammatically correct, polished crap, by all means use this to produce your assignments, and you will then go through 4 years here. Maybe you'll get your degree, and at the end you'll be just in the same position as all those people walking around who aren't paying $80,000 a year to learn something. And as an alternative, if you would like to be somebody who knows how to use these tools rather than be used by them, you need to develop your capacity for discernment, which AI doesn't have. It can't tell what's good. You can learn to tell what's good and true and beautiful, but only by going through the process that universities have developed over the centuries. So trust in the course designs that we have developed, standing on the shoulders of those who came before us, to help develop your own mind, so that then when you go out into the world and an employer says, use AI so that you leverage your value and you're worth more to my company, you'll be a person who can add value to the tool instead of only use it as a substitute for yourself. So I'm very sympathetic to what you said, and I try to convey that to the students, and I'm sure that lands with some percentage of them. And that's sort of my maximum goal at this stage.
I have I both sympathize with a little of the question, and that there's a rhetorical move that we need to make to be human-centered and recognize our broader tradition. And so part of my answer is yes, but to maybe make it a little deeper, I actually love the arts. Here's an arts connection. There's a lot of talk in arts about like having a practice. And to me, one of the things that we've actually not done before in higher ed in a lot of places is talked about practice. We've instead said that it's about knowledge and skills. And I think that the time where we can focus on knowledge and skills is diminishing. I think dispositions are much more important than they used to be. And we haven't thought about that. That's not a thing we can test for. I mean, even on the civic, we talk about like civic life stuff. It's kind of, I always go back to like, voting is not hard. We don't need to teach people how to vote, but it's like the tendency to get together and actually talk about things and be thoughtful about it. That tendency is what is really important, not whether or not they know how. And I think that the biggest danger to me with AI is if we reduce it to skills. Do you know AI skills? And we don't have dispositions. I think this is some of what we've been hearing about from some of our colleagues. I think we've really failed our students. They emerge with a bunch of skills, but they only use one AI tool. They go to it all the time for the same things. Do they know how to use other things? I don't care if they know how if they're not doing it. And I think that's if we shift a little of our focus toward what is the practice of being an informed person, and even just like, I haven't forced you. Did you as a student bring this up? The idea that I'm not even gonna like really push it, but I'm going to let you raise certain things, I think is an interesting question. It shifts the kind of accountability-based classroom to one where it's a little bit more like student-driven or responsive. But I think I want us to talk more about dispositions and practices.
Thank you. Other questions? In the back there, thank you.
Hi. Hi, my name is Greg. It's on. This is on, sort of.
Excuse me, we're video.
Oh, I see. You're recording. Okay. I have to hold it kind of close. I teach sometimes in the art department, art history with Ingjun and with Juliet. And I have two questions that I'll try to be quick with, just so there's time for other questions. This is a question for Sarah. If I'm teaching, I'm not teaching this semester, but if I'm teaching a class later, can we require students to go and meet with the reference librarian?
Yes.
And that won't strain capacity if I have a class of 20, 30 students and I make them all go.
Well, there are a couple different ways to do that. First of all, for art history, if you already know Melissa Betcher, she's your librarian. Maybe invite us to your class and we can come talk about these things. I am on every AI work group in the library, and we have multiple, and she is on a lot of them with me. So she is more than happy to come and talk about that. Or we could set up workshops. I know Ashley Rockmo is here, and she's been doing some workshops too. That's another way to scale it up. But yeah, I've met with students one-on-one or in small groups, but having them come talk to us. If they don't get to talk to their subject specialist, we also have 24/7 chat, which is a real librarian and not a bot. And we have a whole team of part-time librarians that are available to meet with students too. So we have 15 full-time subject librarians with different areas of expertise. And then we have a whole set of part-time librarians. So we can help. And that goes for everybody. So not just
Wonderful,
your
thank you.
department. Yeah.
The one other question I had was for the panel, and it's a crude question about like crude methods. Nobody mentioned anything about blue books. Nobody mentioned anything about just showing up to class and saying, put your stuff away and we're going to discuss the readings. Like nobody can refer to their laptop or anything. I realized some people had kind of intermediate approaches where the students interacted with each other or with the professor. But I was wondering what anyone on the panel has to say about those kind of low-tech methods of disengaging as opposed to engaging with AI.
Well, for me, I actually encourage my students to bring in electronic devices into the classroom for discussion. Because partially because the nature of the subject I teach is very foreign for them. So if they don't have any electronic device to look up for some information or talking points, the discussion is a waste of time. Of course, what I do is that I spread students into small groups, give them instructions or keywords, and then while they discuss, I walk around and participate in each group's discussion to help redirect them to the right track. But I feel that if we try to exclude all the technologies in the classroom, first of all, it's impossible, and second of all, it may not enhance the best result. So that's my own practice. Yeah, it's because for example. In the past, I would have students who actually sneaked out of the classroom saying that he or she needs a bathroom run, but later on, someone else found out that she was sitting outside of classroom recording my lecture. She just sat outside of the classroom recording, and I also had students who just tried to find time to use their cell phone and check their social media, even though I made it very clear that no electronic device. But, for a bigger class, they always felt that the professors is too busy to look at me. But we all know.
We do have time for one more question, just to see if there's anyone else. Oh, so I have two. Okay, let's do two quick ones, maybe.
Hi, I'm Mike Jansen. I'm digital editor with Current. We're a trade publication that covers public broadcasting, and we're part of the School of Communications. And I was curious to know, of the panelists who have asked your students to use AI in assignments, are they just using free versions? Because paid versions are often much more powerful and also can be more accurate. And so following from that, I'm wondering if you are asking them to use free, are you concerned about, in the future, if more students are paying for them, is there not equity in terms of which platforms they're using and others being more able to, do a better job because they're paying for versions? And is there discussion at schools about universities paying for a plan that can be widely used by students to address that? So I guess there are several questions in this question that was supposed to be short, which I apologize for.
Choose one question.
Do you want to say about Kogod?
Sure. So Kogod has a partnership with Perplexity. So we have the paid version of the enterprise for all of our faculty, staff, and students. Obviously, this creates confusion because, not everyone on campus-wide has access to it. But so that levels the equity access issue for our Kogod classes, where we can say, hey, let's use this Perplexity Enterprise Pro version. We're all using the same model. We're all using the same version. And so that's been kind of nice for our use cases. We still will use some free tools, right? Like Perplexity is really good at some knowledge synthesization, but it's not necessarily great for image generation, like art history was talking about, right? So we still use some free versions a little bit sporadically here and there for like vertically specific access.
I feel like I can't let this moment go by without saying we are in some of this crazy moment with misinformation and our current information state because the vast majority of Americans would rather use the free service than pay for information services, than pay for media. It is, to me, a fundamental problem of our democracy that people want the free stuff. And the expectation is that my email should be free, my news should be free, my internet should be free. And I think we're really close to AI should be free. I think this is actually a core democracy question about where do we pay for. And I think that I would encourage all of us to raise exactly this question, but also to say, what kind of society are we accidentally slipping into by all of us defaulting to the free unless we're in like a weird Adobe space? So there's like I like the question as a one we should be, as universities should especially be grappling with.
Well, and I want to ask you a question. So have you tested the free version and the paid version to find out how accurate they are? Because I think that that's also misinformation, that the paid version is better than the free version when there's still enough inaccuracy that's in there.
Right. Well, I use the paid ChatGPT Plus plan in my work, and I admit I'm not up to date on what is free if you use ChatGPT free and what isn't. But I know that like the thinking mode in ChatGPT 5, which I think may be exclusive to Plus, it cites every single fact it finds, so you can double check very easily if the information it's giving you is accurate or not, and it helps you judge. Yes, I have, and it's often very accurate. Whereas lately I've noticed actually the default is getting worse, and it often does give you inaccurate information. But the thinking one, it's much easier to go through and double check everything because you know where to look. It gives you the links to everything.
And so that gets to another question about our information environment, and that's like, is it only pulling open source or freely published things? Because history.com is not the same as a peer-reviewed history paper from a website that publishes scholarly papers. And so like if it's citing history.com because history.com is available on the web, that could still be inaccurate. So that, I think that we need to be doing deeper analysis on the results to see maybe it is citing its sources, but are the sources that it's using credible, and are they well regarded by the disciplines in which you're asking that question?
So we are at time. Were you moving towards the microphone, Max? Did you want to? No.
We're at time.
Karan, really quick comment. Yes, can we have the microphone?
Hi, Karan Martinez from the Center for Professionalism and Communications at Kogod. Sarah, love the Leo Lowe article. Everybody should read it. Universal frameworks for how we teach in a scaffolded manner and a coordinated manner. Students are overcome. We're just throwing AI at them. And I think to think mindfully about how we intersect with other courses, how a first-year student is different from a third-year student is so, so important. We just developed a lesson about seeing bias and judging outputs for our first year classes in professionalism and communications, and we're happy to share that with people. My question is, we had a student show us, maybe it's Primo, the new catalog search, AI-assisted search. It seems like that's been a little undercover. Do you not want us to use that with our students? It seems like one touch, easy, like Google search, but then you search the library resources. So I'm a little confused, and I think our students are too.
Well, like nobody wants to be the last person on the AI tool train, right? And so everybody has been creating specialized tools, and that includes the vendors for our library materials, including Primo. What we've noticed is this is not a substitution for doing a literature review. What this tool can do is, if you don't know where to look, or where to start, it can give you 5 sources that may or may not be related to what you're looking for. The summary is not always accurate because, and this is another area where we're still looking at the accuracy and how well it does the job that it says it's going to do. But I don't know if students understand that this is not a substitute for a literature review. If you ask it the same question multiple times, you get different results. And our catalog, the corpus, the body of information that it's pulling from, is not everything that we subscribe to in our database system. And we know that because we're librarians and we do this every day. But somebody who's coming to do their research doesn't know that, and they often just rely on that one tool, right? They rely on that single search bar that's on our library homepage if they go to the library homepage. And so the AI assistant, there's a false promise that's because it's embedded in a tool that is on our library's homepage, it gives it a false sense of accuracy. And so people don't do as much critical evaluation. And I think that that's where, I mean, we all do this. It's confirmation bias, right? It's our habit building. It's that moment where we don't check the thing that we saw from our friend because we trust our friend, right? We're not doing the deep dive either because of time or because we just assume that why would American University's library give us bad information?
And there's filler words in there too, which is like, why do you need to put however between the summaries of the sources that makes it for students very tempting.
Okay.
'Cause this sure looks like it's done already. But because it's right there on the library homepage,
I know.
it comes from the library database sources, it seems like a pretty safe choice, at least to get started. So I think there's some misconception.
All right. To be continued, because I want to give everyone an applause before Max leaves. He's on the way out. So thank you, everyone.